I died at 33 in a car accident that wasn't an accident at all. My husband Thomas had cut my brake lines after discovering I'd accidentally seen his bank statements, showing wire transfers to his mistress, my best friend Caroline. The last thing I saw before the crash was his text message. I'm sorry it had to be this way, but Caroline and I deserve to be happy. My name is Anna Mitchell, and I spent 10 years being the perfect wife to a man who was planning my murder while sleeping with my best friend. I'd given up my career as an architect to support his political ambitions. I'd smiled through campaign events while he touched Caroline's hand under the table. I'd believed every lie about late meetings and business trips, because I was too in love to see the truth. When I opened my eyes again, I was 23, sitting in a coffee shop where Thomas was about to propose. In my previous life, I'd said yes immediately, convinced I'd found my soulmate. I'd been so blinded by love that I'd missed every red flag, his controlling behavior, his subtle put-downs, the way he isolated me from anyone who questioned our relationship. This time, as Thomas pulled out the ring box with that practiced smile, I saw him clearly for the first time. Anna, you're the woman I want to spend my life with. No. Thomas froze, the ring box open in his hand. What? I said no. I'm not going to marry you. Is this a joke? We've been planning. You've been planning. I've been going along with it. But I don't want this life, Thomas. I don't want you. His expression shifted from shock to anger. So quickly I wondered how I'd ever missed the calculation behind his charm. After everything I've invested in this relationship, the time, the effort, the expectations I've built around us. Invested. Like I was a business deal gone bad. I'm sorry you feel that way. But my answer is no. I walked out of that coffee shop, leaving Thomas sitting there with his unopened ring box and his shattered plans. In my previous life, that proposal had been the beginning of 10 years of gradual destruction. This time, it was just a moment I walked away from. Over the next week, Thomas tried everything to change my mind. Flowers, calls showing up at my apartment. In my previous timeline, I'd found his persistence romantic. This time, I recognized it as refusal to accept my decision. Anna, please, let's talk about this, he said, cornering me outside my office. I don't understand what changed. I realized I don't want to marry someone who sees relationships as investments. Someone who gets angry when things don't go according to his plan. That's not fair. I was surprised, yes, but you were angry. You said I wasted your time. That's not how someone who loves me would respond. Thomas's mask slipped again. So that's it? Years together mean nothing. We dated for 2 years, Thomas. That's not a lifetime. And yes, sometimes you learn things about people that make you realize they're not who you thought they were. Like what? What did I do that's so terrible? Like cutting my brake lines in another timeline, I thought. Like spending 10 years manipulating and controlling me before deciding I was more valuable dead than divorced. It doesn't matter. I just know this isn't right for me. After that conversation, I blocked his number and threw myself into rebuilding the career I'd abandoned in my previous life. In my first timeline, I'd quit my job at a prestigious architecture firm because Thomas had convinced me his political career needed a wife who could focus full-time on being supportive. I'd given up projects I'd loved, connections I'd built, dreams I'd had, all to be the perfect political wife. This time, I stayed at the firm and took on the challenging projects I'd turned down before. I worked late not because someone else demanded it, but because I was building something I was proud of. 3 months after refusing Thomas's proposal, I was presenting a design for a major civic building when I saw him in the audience. He was there with Caroline, my former best friend who, in this timeline, I'd distanced myself from after noticing her inappropriate interest in Thomas during our relationship. After the presentation, Thomas approached me. That was impressive. You've really thrown yourself into work since we broke up. We didn't break up. I declined your proposal. There's a difference. Anna, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Maybe I pushed too hard for marriage. Maybe we could start over, take things slower. I'm not interested. Come on, don't be stubborn. We were good together. No, we weren't. You were controlling and I was too in love to notice. But I notice now. Caroline appeared at Thomas's side, her hand possessive on his arm. Thomas, we should go. You have that meeting with the campaign team. So he was already with her. That had happened faster than in my previous timeline, probably because I'd rejected him, leaving him free to pursue her openly. Campaign? I asked. I'm running for city council, Thomas said with that proud smile I used to find attractive. Caroline's been helping me organize. In my previous life, I'd been the one helping him organize, fundraising, networking, handling every detail of his campaigns while he took all the credit. This time, Caroline could have that honor. Good luck with that, I said and meant it, because I knew exactly how Thomas's political career would go, built on lies and manipulation until eventually someone would expose the truth. 6 months after refusing Thomas, I won a major industry award for one of my building designs. The recognition came with job offers from 3 international firms and a feature in Architectural Digest. At the award ceremony, I ran into Thomas again. His city council campaign was struggling. Turns out Caroline wasn't as skilled at political organizing as I'd been, and Thomas's controlling personality was alienating potential supporters. Congratulations, he said, approaching me at the reception. Your career is really taking off. Thank you. I've been thinking about us a lot lately, about what we could have built together. A political career for you and nothing for me? That's what we would have built. That's not fair. I always supported your work. You convinced me to quit my job, to give up my career so I could support yours. That's not support, Thomas. That's exploitation. His expression hardened. I gave you opportunities, access to people who could have helped you. I didn't need access through you. I had my own skills and connections. I just let you convince me I needed you more than I needed myself. You've changed, Thomas said coldly. You used to be warm, supportive. Now you're cold and ambitious. No, I've always been ambitious. You just convinced me to hide it. After Thomas left, Caroline approached me. She looked tired, stressed in a way I remembered from my previous timeline when I'd been in her position. Can we talk? She asked. About what? About Thomas. About how to manage him. I almost laughed. Manage him? Caroline, you can't manage Thomas. You can only survive him or leave him. But you were with him for years. You must have figured out how to. I figured out how to make myself smaller and smaller until there was almost nothing left of me. Is that what you want advice on? Caroline's eyes filled with tears. He's not like this all the time. When it's good, it's really good. And when it's bad? He has expectations. Standards. He needs things a certain way. He's controlling you. The same way he controlled me. The only difference is you're seeing it sooner. But his career, he needs support to win the council seat. His career isn't your responsibility. Your life is your own. Don't make the mistake I almost made. Caroline left looking shaken, and I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and pity. In my previous timeline, she'd actively worked to seduce Thomas while I was married to him. In this timeline, she'd gotten what she wanted, Thomas all to herself, and was discovering why I'd walked away. 1 year after refusing Thomas's proposal, my firm offered me a partnership and a chance to lead their new international division. It meant relocating to London for 3 years, working on projects that would define my career. I accepted without hesitation. In my previous life, opportunities like this had come up and I turned them all down for Thomas. His career, his needs, his plans always taking priority over mine. This time, my only consideration was whether I wanted the opportunity, and the answer was yes. The night before I left for London, my phone rang. Thomas, I heard you're leaving the country. For 3 years. That's right. Anna, don't do this. Don't throw away what we could have. What we could have had is what you wanted. Me giving up my dreams to support yours. I'm not interested in that life. I've changed. I've been working on myself, learning to be less controlling. That's good for you, Thomas. But it doesn't change my decision. Please. Just meet me for coffee. Let me show you I'm different now. Against my better judgment, or maybe because I wanted closure, I agreed to meet him one last time. Thomas looked different. Tired, older, like the stress of managing his own life without someone doing it for him had taken a toll. I lost the city council race, he said after we'd ordered. Caroline left me right after. Said I was too demanding, too controlling, that she couldn't do it anymore. I'm sorry that happened. Are you? Because you could have helped me. If you'd been there, supporting me like you used to, I would have won. And there it was, the truth he couldn't hide even when trying to apologize. In Thomas's mind, I existed to serve his ambitions. My value was in what I could do for him, not in who I was as a person. That's exactly why I left, I said quietly. You still think my purpose was to help you succeed. You still don't see me as a person with my own goals and dreams. I never said you couldn't have goals. You didn't have to say it. You just made sure yours always came first. Every time I had an opportunity, you found a reason why I shouldn't take it. Every time I wanted to pursue something, you needed me for something else. I needed a partner. You needed a servant. Someone to manage your life, boost your image, and ask for nothing in return. That's not a partnership, Thomas. That's exploitation. So you're just going to abandon everything we built together? We didn't build anything together. I built your life while mine stagnated. And now I'm building my own life, the one I should have been building all along. Thomas's expression went cold. You're going to regret this. You're going to be alone in London, working yourself to death for a career that will never love you back. And when you realize what you threw away, I'll be with someone else who actually appreciates what I offer. I hope so. I hope you find someone who wants what you're offering. But it won't be me. I left that coffee shop for the last time, and the next morning, I boarded a plane for London. The 3 years in London were transformative. I designed buildings that won international awards. I built a network of colleagues who respected my work and pushed me to grow. I dated casually. People who saw me as an equal rather than as support staff for their ambitions. Most importantly, I learned who I was without Thomas's voice in my head telling me who I should be. In my previous timeline, I'd spent those same years married to Thomas, slowly dying from the inside as he climbed political ranks, and I became more and more of an accessory to his success. I'd given up everything that made me myself, believing that's what love required. This time, I learned that real love never requires you to diminish yourself. When I returned to the US after 3 years, I was 32, 1 year younger than I'd been when Thomas killed me in my previous timeline. Instead of planning my murder, he was a failed politician working in his father's real estate business, bitter and alone. I learned this from Caroline, who called me unexpectedly 2 weeks after my return. I need to apologize, she said. For everything. For Thomas, for how I acted, for not believing you when you tried to warn me. It's been 4 years, Caroline. Why now? Because I finally got out. Completely out. And I've been in therapy trying to understand how I let someone treat me the way Thomas treated me. And my therapist asked me if I'd ever seen the warning signs, and I realized, you tried to tell me. That day at your award ceremony. You tried to warn me and I didn't listen. What happened? Everything you said would happen. He was controlling, demanding, impossible to please. Every success I had, he made about how it helped him. Every failure was my fault. I spent 3 years disappearing into what he needed me to be. I'm sorry you went through that. Don't be sorry. I chose it. Even after you warned me. But Anna, thank you for trying. And I'm sorry for every time I didn't believe you, didn't support you, didn't see what Thomas was really like. After we hung up, I thought about my previous life and how different things might have been if Caroline had been the one to marry Thomas instead of conspiring to seduce him while he was my husband. In this timeline, she'd gotten what she wanted and discovered it was poison. In my previous timeline, the same thing had happened, just with both of us as victims instead of just one. Either way, Thomas destroyed what he touched. 6 months after returning to the US, I was at an industry gala when Thomas approached me. I hadn't seen him in 4 years, and the change was striking. He looked older, harder, bitter in a way that showed on his face. Anna, I heard you were back. Thomas. Congratulations on the Whitmore building. It's getting a lot of attention. Thank you. Must be nice, having your career take off while mine crashed and burned. I'm sorry your political career didn't work out. No, you're not. You're glad. You wanted me to fail after you refused to help me. Thomas, your failures aren't my responsibility. You made choices that led to where you are. I made different choices that led to where I am. That's all. You could have had this success in me. We could have had it all together. No, we couldn't have. Because for us to work, I would have had to give up all of this. That was always the deal, your success or mine, never both. That's not true. It is true. Every time I had an opportunity, you found a reason why I should turn it down. Every time I wanted to pursue something, you needed me for something else. Your career always came first, and mine had to wait. Except waiting meant never, and we both know it. Thomas's expression twisted with something ugly. You think you're so much better than me now. So successful, so independent. But you're alone, Anna. No partner, no family, just buildings and awards. Is that really better? Yes. Because it's mine. I built it. And no one can take it from me or manipulate me out of it. That's worth more than a partnership where I had to make myself smaller to make someone else feel bigger. You're going to regret this, Thomas said, his voice cold. You're going to end up old and alone, with nothing but your career to keep you warm. Maybe. Or maybe I'll find someone who actually loves me instead of what I can do for them. Either way, I'll be fine. Because I learned to love myself enough not to settle for someone who wanted to use me. Thomas walked away, and I felt lighter than I had in either of my lifetimes. Because I'd finally said everything I'd needed to say, and I'd done it from a position of strength instead of from the bottom of my previous life's wreckage. 2 months later, I met Daniel Park at a professional conference. He was a structural engineer, brilliant and funny and completely uninterested in making me small to make himself big. Our first date was a disaster. We argued about building techniques for 2 hours and both left annoyed. Our second date was better. We found common ground and genuine respect. By the third date, we were friends who were attracted to each other and curious about where that might lead. I should tell you something, I said over dinner on our 5th date. I was in a relationship once where I gave up everything for someone else's ambitions. I won't do that again. Good, Daniel said. Because I don't want someone who gives up their ambitions. I want someone who has their own goals, and we figure out how to support each other in pursuing them. Even if it means we're not always in the same city. Even then, I've seen too many relationships where one person sacrifices everything and ends up resenting the other. That's not sustainable. It was such a different conversation from the ones I'd had with Thomas, who'd always framed my career as something that would wait, something less important than his, something I could always come back to later. With Daniel, my career was as important as his. My goals mattered as much as his. We built our relationship around mutual support, not one-way sacrifice. 1 year into dating Daniel, I ran into Thomas at a restaurant. He was there for a business dinner, looking uncomfortable and out of place. When he saw me with Daniel, his expression went through surprise, pain, and finally resignation. Anna, he said, stopping by our table. I heard you were seeing someone. Daniel Park, right? The engineer? That's right. Thomas looked at Daniel, sizing him up. You must be very proud of Anna. Her career is really impressive. I am, Daniel said easily. And she seems pretty proud of my work too. It's nice having a partner who celebrates your success instead of competing with it. The barb hit its mark. Thomas's smile tightened. Well, I hope you're happy together. We are, I said. And Thomas? I hope you find happiness too. The kind that doesn't require someone else to diminish themselves. After Thomas left, Daniel looked at me curiously. That's the ex. That's him. He looked miserable. He is. Because he's still waiting for success to fall in his lap, still convinced that his failures are everyone else's fault, still unable to see that his problems start and end with his own choices. And you're okay? Seeing him didn't upset you? No. Because I'm not that person anymore, the one who would have given up everything for him. That version of me died a long time ago. This version knows better. 3 years into my relationship with Daniel, he proposed. Not in a coffee shop with a speech about what he'd invested in our relationship, but on a beach after a conversation about our future. where we both talked about our individual goals and how we'd support each other in achieving them. "I want to marry you," he said. "But only if you're sure this is what you want. That I'm not something you're settling for or sacrificing other opportunities to be with." "You're not a sacrifice," I said. "You're a partner. There's a difference." We married 6 months later in a small ceremony with close friends and family. Caroline came. We'd rebuilt our friendship slowly over the years, both of us changed by what we'd been through with Thomas. At the reception, she pulled me aside. "I saw Thomas last week. At his father's office. He looks awful, Anna. Like life has beaten him down." "That's sad." "Is it though? After everything he did." I thought about my previous life, about dying at 33 because Thomas had decided I was worth more dead than divorced. About the 10 years of manipulation and control that had led to that moment. "Yes, it's still sad," I said finally. "Not because I feel sorry for him or think he deserves sympathy, but because he had opportunities to be different, to choose growth instead of bitterness, and he didn't take them. That's a waste of a life, even if it's a life I'm glad I'm not part of." "You're more forgiving than I am." "I'm not forgiving. I'm just done. Holding on to anger about Thomas means he still has power over me. And he doesn't. He's just a man who made bad choices and is living with the consequences." 5 years into my marriage with Daniel, I was 41. 8 years older than I'd been when Thomas killed me in my previous timeline. Instead of being dead, I was successful, happy, in a genuine partnership that enriched both our lives. My architecture firm had become internationally recognized. Daniel's engineering company had grown to employ over 50 people. We had a daughter who was curious and independent, and would never be taught that her value came from supporting someone else's dreams. One afternoon, I received a call from a former colleague. "Anna, I thought you should know. Thomas Chun died yesterday. Heart attack." He was 43. I sat with this information, processing what it meant. In my previous life, Thomas had lived into his 50s at least, long enough to have a successful political career built on my bones. In this timeline, he'd died young, bitter and alone, having never achieved the success he'd felt entitled to. "Are you okay?" the colleague asked. "I'm fine. We haven't been in contact for years." "I know, but still. He was your ex. There's a funeral on Saturday if you want to attend." I went to the funeral, not out of love or even pity, but out of a need for closure. The service was small. His parents, some colleagues from his father's business, a handful of people who'd known him. No political figures came. No crowds of supporters. Just a small group mourning a man who'd died, having never lived up to his own inflated sense of importance. Caroline found me after the service. "I'm glad you came." "I almost didn't." "I understand that. But Anna, I've been thinking a lot about timelines and choices lately. About how different things might have been if we'd all made different decisions." "What do you mean?" "I mean, in another life, maybe you married him. Maybe I helped him succeed. Maybe everything turned out differently. But in this life, you walked away, and that choice changed everything. For you, for me, even for Thomas." She was closer to the truth than she knew. In another life, I had married him. I had helped him succeed. And it had ended with my death. "Some choices save your life," I said quietly. "Even when you can't see the danger you're avoiding." Do you think Thomas knew? At the end? That he'd wasted his life being bitter about what he couldn't control? I don't know. I hope so. I hope he had a moment of clarity where he understood that his failures were his own responsibility, not mine or anyone else's. After the funeral, I drove to the cemetery where Thomas was buried. Standing at his grave, I thought about both timelines, the one where he'd killed me, and this one where he'd died bitter and alone while I thrived. "I don't forgive you," I said to the headstone. "Not for what you did in the life you don't remember, and not for what you would have done in this one if I'd let you. But I'm grateful for the lesson you taught me, that the most important thing I can do is choose myself, even when love makes me want to choose someone else." I left that cemetery and drove home to Daniel and our daughter, to the life I'd built from the ashes of my previous one. That evening, Daniel found me in my office, staring at plans for a new building. A women's shelter designed to give victims of controlling relationships a safe place to rebuild their lives. This is the Chun Project, he asked. Yes. Thomas's parents donated the money as a memorial. They asked me to design it since I stopped. Since you were what? Since I was one of the ones who got away before it was too late. Daniel pulled me close. You didn't just get away, Anna. You built something extraordinary from what you learned. This shelter is going to save lives. I hope so. Because in another life, I stopped myself again. I'd never told Daniel about my previous timeline, about dying and being reborn. It felt too impossible to explain. In another life, what? In another life, I didn't get away. And I want to make sure other women do. The shelter opened 2 years later. At the dedication ceremony, I spoke about recognizing manipulation before it destroys you, about the difference between love and control, about choosing yourself even when it feels selfish. In the audience, I saw faces of women I recognized from my architecture firm, from my neighborhood, from Caroline's therapy group. Women who'd been where I'd been, who'd gotten out or were still trying to. This building represents more than shelter, I said. It represents the possibility of starting over, of making different choices, of building a life that's yours instead of living a life that someone else designed for you. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. Ms. Mitchell? I wanted to thank you. Your story, about walking away from someone controlling, it gave me the courage to leave my husband. This shelter is where I'm staying while I figure out what's next. I'm glad you got out. Was it hard, walking away from someone you loved? I thought about Thomas, about the 10 years I'd given him in my previous life and the nothing I'd given him in this one. Yes, but staying would have been harder, because staying would have meant giving up myself. And you can't love someone properly if you've lost yourself in the process. 10 years after refusing Thomas's proposal, I was 48. Daniel and I had just celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary. Our daughter was 12, brilliant and confident. My architecture firm had designed 3 more women's shelters across the country. I'd published a book about designing spaces that prioritized safety and independence. I'd built a life so completely different from my previous one that sometimes I could barely remember the woman I'd been. Desperate for Thomas's approval, willing to sacrifice everything, blind to the danger I was in. That woman had died in a car crash at 33, murdered by the man she'd loved. This woman was thriving at 48, surrounded by genuine love and meaningful work. The difference between those 2 lives was a single word spoken in a coffee shop. No. 1 syllable that had changed everything. Because I'd been blinded by love once, and it had cost me my life. But reborn with the memory of that mistake, I'd changed my fate. Not through revenge or by actively trying to hurt Thomas, but simply by choosing myself over someone who wanted to destroy me. And that choice, that simple act of self-preservation, had been the best revenge of all. Thomas had died bitter and alone, having never achieved the success he'd felt entitled to. Having driven away everyone who tried to love him with his controlling behavior. I had lived to create beauty, to help others, to experience genuine partnership, to build something meaningful from the ruins of my previous life. He'd wanted to use me as a stepping stone to his success. Instead, I'd used the lesson he taught me to build something better than either of us could have imagined. That was how I made him pay. Not by hurting him, but by living so well without him that he spent the rest of his life regretting what he'd lost. Blinded by love, I'd lost my life to my husband. Reborn after betrayal, I'd changed my fate. And the life I built from those ashes was my revenge. Proof that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. But the story didn't end there. 15 years after refusing Thomas's proposal, I was 53 years old. My daughter Emma was graduating from college with a degree in architecture, following in my footsteps, but with none of the self-doubt I'd carried at her age. Mom, Professor Sanders wants me to stay for grad school, Emma said over dinner one evening. But Tyler thinks we should move to Seattle together. He got that job offer from the tech company. Tyler was Emma's boyfriend of 2 years, a nice enough young man who reminded me uncomfortably of Thomas. Not in obvious ways, but in subtle ones. The way he always had opinions about Emma's choices, the way he framed his preferences as what's best for us, the way Emma's opportunities always seemed to conflict with his plans. What do you want to do? I asked. I don't know, Tyler says Seattle is a better opportunity long-term, that I can always go to grad school later. And he's probably right. Emma, stop. What do you want to do? Not what Tyler thinks you should do. Not what makes sense for his career. What do you want? Emma looked at me with tears in her eyes. I want to stay for grad school. Professor Sanders wants me to work on a research project that could lead to published papers, maybe even a fellowship. But Tyler says that's just school. That real life is about jobs and building a future together. Tyler is wrong, I said firmly. Real life is about pursuing your own goals and building a future that's yours. If someone loves you, they support that. They don't ask you to sacrifice your dreams for their convenience. But relationships are about compromise. Compromise means both people adjust. Not one person always giving up what they want so the other person can have everything. I took her hand. Emma, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago. I told her then about Thomas. Not about the rebirth or the previous timeline, but about the relationship itself. About how I'd almost married someone who would have slowly erased everything I was. About recognizing the warning signs in time and walking away. About building the life I had now. Because I'd chosen myself over someone who wanted to diminish me. Tyler's not as bad as your ex sounds, Emma said when I finished. He's supportive most of the time. Most of the time isn't enough. Love isn't about being supportive most of the time. It's about consistently prioritizing your partner's well-being and growth alongside your own. Emma sat quietly for a moment. You think I should break up with him? I think you should go to grad school and pursue the opportunity you actually want. And then see if Tyler supports that decision, or tries to manipulate you out of it. That will tell you everything you need to know. 2 weeks later, Emma called me crying. You were right. When I told Tyler I was staying for grad school, he got so angry. Said I was choosing school over him. That I was being selfish. That I'd regret throwing away our relationship for something that might not even pan out. What did you say? I said that if he really loved me, he'd want me to pursue my dreams. And he said, her voice broke. He said dreams don't keep you warm at night. That I'd end up alone like you almost did. Married to my career instead of a person. My blood ran cold. That was almost exactly what Thomas had said to me. And what did you say to that? I said I'd rather be alone with my dreams than partnered with someone who wanted me to give them up. Then I ended it. I'm proud of you. It hurts though, Mom. Even knowing it's the right choice, it still hurts. I know. But the pain of a breakup is temporary. The pain of sacrificing yourself for someone else lasts decades. Emma stayed for grad school. She thrived, published papers, won fellowships. 3 years later, she met someone at an academic conference. Another architect who shared her passion and supported her ambitions because they aligned with his own values, not because it was convenient for him. Watching Emma navigate her relationship with the wisdom I'd had to learn through death and rebirth made me grateful for the lesson I could pass down. My daughter would never have to die and be reborn to learn that choosing yourself isn't selfish. She'd learned it from watching me live it. 20 years after refusing Thomas's proposal, Daniel and I were sitting on our porch watching the sunset when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. Ms. Mitchell? This is Claire Chen. Thomas Chen's daughter. I found your number in my father's old papers. I hope you don't mind me calling. I glanced at Daniel, who was watching me with concern. I don't mind. What can I do for you? I'm writing a thesis on emotional manipulation in relationships, and I found letters my father wrote to you that he never sent. After he died, I mean. There were dozens of them, spanning years. They're disturbing. And I wanted to understand what happened between you two. My mother never talked about you. Your father and I dated briefly when we were young. I ended the relationship and we had minimal contact after that. The letters suggest it was more than that. He was obsessed with you. With the life you built after leaving him. He tracked your career, your marriage, your daughter. He blamed you for everything that went wrong in his life. My skin prickled. I didn't know that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. I needed to understand. Because my mother told me, right before she died, that my father had been planning to leave her for someone else. That he'd been having an affair throughout their entire marriage. And reading these letters, I think that someone was you. Or the idea of you anyway. I never had an affair with your father. We never had contact after a certain point. I know. That's what makes it so disturbing. He built an entire fantasy relationship with you in his head while treating my mother and everyone else around him like they were temporary substitutes for what he really wanted. Claire's voice cracked. I grew up watching him destroy my mother's self-esteem, watching him control every aspect of her life. And now I understand. He was punishing her for not being you, for not being someone who'd already rejected him decades ago. After the call ended, I sat very still, processing this information. In my previous timeline, Thomas had killed me when I became inconvenient. In this timeline, he'd spent decades obsessing over me, letting that obsession poison his relationships with everyone else. Are you okay? Daniel asked. I don't know. I thought I'd escaped cleanly, that refusing him was the end of it. But apparently in his mind, we were always unfinished business. You didn't do anything wrong. His obsession was his problem, not yours. I know, but it's disturbing to realize he was still fixated on me for decades. That he built his entire life around resentment of a choice I made when I was 23. That's who Thomas was. Someone who couldn't accept that the world didn't revolve around his desires. You were just the most prominent example of someone who told him no. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Claire Chen, Thomas's daughter, growing up with a father who was emotionally present for someone who wasn't even there. About his wife, whoever she was in this timeline, living with a man who resented her for not being someone else. In my previous life, Thomas had killed me when I became inconvenient. In this life, I'd escaped, but others hadn't. And while their suffering wasn't my fault, wasn't my responsibility, it still felt heavy knowing that my rejection had somehow poisoned Thomas's ability to treat anyone else fairly. The next morning, I called Claire back. I want to help with your thesis. If you're writing about emotional manipulation, I can share what I experienced in my brief relationship with your father. It might provide context for what your mother went through. Over the next several months, Claire and I talked extensively. I told her about Thomas's controlling behavior, his inability to accept no as an answer, the way he framed every disagreement as a personal betrayal. I shared the warning signs I'd recognized and the decision process that led me to walk away. Claire's thesis became a published paper, then a book about generational patterns of emotional abuse, and the importance of teaching young people to recognize red flags early. You saved my life, you know, Claire told me at her book launch. Not literally, but close. Growing up with my father, I thought his behavior was normal. That love meant control. That devotion meant sacrifice. But learning about your experience, about how you recognized it early and left, it showed me that wasn't true. It gave me a framework for understanding what was wrong in my own relationships. You were already looking for answers. I just provided some context. No, it was more than that. You showed me that walking away isn't giving up. It's self-preservation. And that lesson saved me from ending up like my mother, trapped with someone who treated me like a placeholder for someone else. 25 years after refusing Thomas's proposal, I was 63 years old and contemplating retirement. My architecture firm had become one of the most respected in the country. The women's shelters I'd designed were being replicated across the nation. Emma had her own successful firm and a happy marriage. Daniel and I had grandchildren who filled our home with joy. One afternoon, I received a package from an attorney's office. Inside was a letter and a journal. The letter explained that Thomas's mother had recently passed away, and in sorting through her effects, they'd found this journal Thomas had kept for years. His mother had requested it be sent to me, believing I had a right to know. I almost didn't open the journal. What good could come from reading the private thoughts of a man who'd spent decades resenting me? But curiosity won. The journal spanned 15 years, from shortly after I refused his proposal until a few years before his death. It was a catalog of bitterness, blame, and self-pity. Thomas chronicling every one of his failures and attributing each one to my decision not to marry him. He'd convinced himself that I was the key to his success, that my support would have unlocked his political career, that my presence would have made him a better person. He'd built an elaborate fantasy where our life together would have been perfect, where I would have been happy to sacrifice everything for him, where his ambitions would have been fulfilled. But buried in the resentment were occasional moments of clarity, brief paragraphs where Thomas almost understood that his problems were his own making, where he recognized that trying to control Caroline and later his wife wasn't love, where he acknowledged that his sense of entitlement had destroyed his relationships. These moments of clarity were always followed by more blame, more justification, more insistence that he was the victim of circumstances beyond his control. The final entry, written a few weeks before his death, was different. "I'm dying," it read. "Heart problems, the doctors say. Stress, genetics, lifestyle. But I know the truth. I'm dying because I spent my life chasing something I was never going to get. Anna didn't destroy my life by leaving. She revealed that I never had the capacity to build what I wanted in the first place. I blamed her because it was easier than accepting that I was the problem. I wonder sometimes what she's doing now. If she's happy. If she ever thinks about the life we didn't have. Part of me hopes she's miserable. That she regrets leaving me. That she ended up alone and bitter like I am. But another part of me hopes she's happy. Because if she is, it means I was wrong about everything. It means the key to success wasn't having the right woman support you. It was being the right person yourself. I wasn't the right person. I never was. And no amount of blaming Anna changes that." I closed the journal and sat with it for a long time. Thomas had spent the last weeks of his life finally understanding the truth, that his failures were his own, that his attempts to control others had destroyed his relationships, that happiness came from who you were, not who you had. But he'd learned it too late to do anything with that knowledge. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, finding me on the porch with the journal. "I think so. It's sad reading this. Seeing someone waste their entire life on resentment and blame, only figuring out the truth when there's no time left to change. Do you wish things had been different? That he'd learned these lessons earlier?" "In a way. Because maybe if he had, he wouldn't have hurt so many people. His wife, his daughter, Caroline, all the other women he tried to control. But I can't carry responsibility for his choices. He had opportunities to change, to grow, to seek help. He chose not to take them." "What will you do with the journal?" "Nothing. It's done. Thomas is dead, his victims have moved on, and the lessons have been learned. The journal is just a record of a life wasted on the wrong priorities." I put the journal in a drawer and didn't look at it again. 30 years after refusing Thomas's proposal, I was 68 years old. Daniel and I celebrated our 35th wedding anniversary with a small party attended by our children, grandchildren, friends, and colleagues whose lives had intersected with ours over the decades. Caroline came, now a successful therapist specializing in helping women recognize and escape controlling relationships. Emma came with her husband and their 3 children. Claire Chun came with her partner and her own children, now using her father's negative example to teach her kids about healthy relationships. As I looked around the room at all these lives that had been touched by my decision to walk away from Thomas, the women who'd found shelter in buildings I designed, the students who'd learned from my career path, the family members who'd benefited from the lessons I'd passed down, I understood something profound. My revenge on Thomas hadn't been his death or his failures or his wasted life. My revenge had been this: living so fully, helping so many, building so much meaning that his absence from my life was barely noticeable except as a cautionary tale. He'd wanted to be the center of my universe, the defining relationship of my life, the person whose loss would devastate me. Instead, he'd become a footnote, the man I'd briefly dated and wisely left, whose bad example had taught me what to avoid. That was the sweetest revenge of all. Not that he'd suffered, but that he'd been so thoroughly irrelevant to the life I'd actually lived. At 73, I published my final book, a memoir about building a meaningful career, maintaining a genuine partnership, and passing down the wisdom that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. The book included a chapter about Thomas, not dwelling on details, but examining the pattern of control and manipulation I'd recognized and escaped. I wrote it not to hurt him posthumously, but to help others recognize the same patterns in their own lives. "Don't you worry about tarnishing his reputation?" my editor asked. His reputation tarnished itself. I'm just documenting the pattern so others can protect themselves. The book became required reading in several college courses about healthy relationships and recognizing emotional abuse. Young women reached out to thank me for sharing my experience, for showing them that walking away from someone controlling wasn't giving up on love. It was making room for real love. At 78, Daniel passed away peacefully in his sleep after a brief illness. We'd had 45 years of genuine partnership, mutual support, and real love. The grief was profound but not regretful. We'd built something beautiful together, and I would carry that with me. At his funeral, Emma spoke about what a real partnership looked like, using her parents' marriage as the example. My father never asked my mother to be smaller, so he could feel bigger. He celebrated her success, supported her ambitions, and built his own life alongside hers rather than instead of hers. That's what love looks like. And that's what I hope I'm building with my own partner. After the funeral, Clairton approached me. She was now 70 herself, her book on emotional manipulation having become a classic in psychology courses. I wanted to thank you again. For everything. For showing me what my father was, for helping me understand that his treatment of my mother wasn't normal, for giving me the framework to build something different. You did that yourself. I just shared my experience. No, it was more than that. Your choice to walk away from my father, to refuse his proposal and build your own life. That single decision created ripples that touched dozens of lives. Mine, my mother's, your daughter's, all the women who read your books or found shelter in your buildings or learned from your example. One choice 50 years ago, and look at all the good that came from it. She was right. That single no spoken in a coffee shop at 23 had changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd learned from my example, been helped by my work, or benefited from the lessons I'd passed down. At 82, I was preparing to move into assisted living when Emma found the journal Thomas had kept. I'd forgotten about it, buried in a drawer for decades. Mom, should I read this? Only if you want to understand what a life lived in bitterness looks like. It's not pleasant reading. Emma read it over several days, then came back to me with tears in her eyes. He was so angry. At you, at himself, at everyone. And reading between the lines, I can see he knew he was the problem, but he couldn't stop blaming everyone else anyway. That was Thomas. Moments of clarity followed by years of deflection. The thing that struck me most was how much he'd built up in his head about what your life together would have been. This elaborate fantasy where you were happy to support him, where his career flourished, where everything was perfect. It was delusional. It was. Because the Anna he imagined, submissive, supportive, selfless, wasn't real. She was what he needed me to be, not who I actually was. How did you recognize that so early? Most people don't. I thought about telling Emma the truth then. About dying in another timeline, about being reborn with knowledge I shouldn't have had, about making different choices because I'd already lived through the consequences. But that truth felt too impossible, too strange. And it didn't matter anyway. Whether I'd learned through rebirth or through careful observation, the lesson was the same. Recognize who someone really is, not who you want them to be. I paid attention, I said instead. To his actions more than his words. To the patterns more than the promises. And when I saw who he really was, I chose to believe it. At 85, I passed away peacefully in my sleep, surrounded by my children and grandchildren. My obituary mentioned my architectural career, the women's shelters I'd designed, the books I'd written, the family I'd raised, the decades of genuine partnership with Daniel. Thomas wasn't mentioned at all. He'd been such a small part of my actual life that he didn't warrant inclusion in the summary of my achievements. That ultimately was the revenge. Not that I'd hurt him or destroyed him, or even thought about him much. Just that I'd lived so fully without him that he'd become irrelevant. A footnote, a cautionary tale, a brief chapter in a much longer story. Blinded by love, I'd lost my life to my husband in another timeline. Reborn after betrayal, I'd changed my fate in this one. And the life I built, full of meaning, purpose, genuine love, and lasting impact, was proof that choosing yourself over someone who wants to diminish you isn't selfish. It's survival. And sometimes survival, lived fully, joyfully, meaningfully, is the sweetest revenge of all.